Most people assume the emotional moment happens at the goodbye itself, the brief hug, soft words, and final touch before the door closes. That interpretation feels natural, but canine experience works differently. For a dog, the most significant moment begins earlier, during subtle environmental shifts. Pace increases, sound patterns change, focus moves elsewhere. Canine perception does not wait for explanation or meaning to form. The body reacts first. Research observing canine awareness shows that routine disruption, altered movement, and tonal change are processed immediately, well before emotion or interpretation develops. This perspective changes how absence is understood. The purpose here is not to create guilt or offer comfort. The goal is clarity. Understanding what a dog actually experiences during separation reveals a very different internal process than most owners imagine. If learning how dogs register safety, predictability, and change feels important, subscribing may help, because absence is not felt emotionally at first. It is detected physically, and misunderstanding that moment shapes everything that follows. Why this question is often misunderstood. When people miss someone, the experience is shaped by time and memory. Minutes stretch, past moments replay, anticipation builds around reunion. That internal process feels automatic. So it becomes the lens used to interpret canine behavior. Dogs, however, do not process separation through reflection or mental projection. Internal experience remains anchored in immediate physical sensation rather than imagined past or future. Sensory input, body tension, and environmental consistency take priority. Research into canine perception shows that responses arise from present state regulation, not emotional storytelling. Asking whether a dog misses. A person applies a human framework to a nervous system that operates differently. That difference does not imply emotional absence. It signals a different organizing principle. Instead of longing, the canine system scans for stability. Sounds carry familiarity. Movement patterns signal predictability. Spatial consistency determines whether the body can soften or must remain alert. When conditions remain recognizable, internal balance returns quickly. When disruption feels unresolved, vigilance lingers. Understanding this distinction changes the question entirely. The focus shifts away from emotion as humans define it, and toward regulation as dogs experience it. The issue becomes less about missing and more about whether internal safety can be restored once something familiar shifts. Dogs don't experience time the way we do. A dog does not measure absence by minutes or hours. Numerical duration holds no meaning. What registers instead is environmental continuity. Space either feels consistent or altered. When routines remain intact, internal awareness settles quietly. When familiar cues dissolve, tension increases. That difference explains why identical periods of separation can lead to opposite outcomes. One animal rests calmly, another circles the room. Bond strength is not the deciding factor. Regulation capacity is. Some nervous systems adapt quickly to change. Others remain stimulated longer. Predictability matters more than length. Rhythm matters more than reassurance. Feeding cues, sound patterns, and spatial familiarity determine whether rest becomes possible. Without disruption, time passes without weight. With uncertainty, moments feel heavier, even if duration remains short. This is why routine carries such influence. Consistency teaches the body that change does not equal threat. Over time, repetition builds tolerance for separation. When routine fractures abruptly, the body compensates by staying engaged. Absence, from a canine perspective, is not something counted. It is something felt through stability. The clock becomes irrelevant. The environment becomes everything. What changes inside a dog when you leave? Departure does not require dramatic action for a dog to register change. The shift is subtle and immediate. Movement patterns alter. Sound levels thin. Guidance within the space fades. The nervous system responds at once, not through thought or interpretation, but through automatic adjustment. Regulation begins the moment familiar input drops away. For some dogs, tension releases quickly as balance returns with little effort. For others, activation remains higher for longer. No decision drives this response. Assessment happens without awareness. Is the environment still organized? Do familiar patterns remain readable? When the answer feels clear, the body settles. When clarity feels incomplete, alertness continues. This sequence does not involve emotional reasoning or conscious reaction. Biological regulation determines the response. Internal systems are responding to whether conditions still feel manageable. A regulated state allows rest, light play, or quiet exploration. An unsettled state results in monitoring, pacing, or waiting. None of this reflects intention, preference, or emotional judgment. The behavior reflects how the nervous system interprets environmental information. Once the space signals reliability again, engagement softens naturally. Until that signal becomes consistent, readiness stays active. Everything that follows, sleep, observation, movement, emerges from this initial regulatory shift. The body is not reacting to absence itself, but to how clearly the environment communicates stability after familiar input changes. Why some dogs settle while others don't. Dogs that relax easily during separation are not less bonded or indifferent. Internal regulation systems have learned through experience that departure does not remove safety. Balance returns quickly because the body expects the pattern to resolve. Dogs that struggle are not acting out or resisting separation. Sensitivity to change is simply higher. Alertness remains active longer, with attention directed toward sound shifts, movement changes, and spatial cues. This state serves protection rather than defiance. Familiar signals have not yet provided enough confirmation for full release. Repetition plays a critical role. Predictable departures teach the nervous system what to expect and reduce the need for prolonged monitoring. Some dogs integrate that information rapidly. Others need more consistent exposure before regulation arrives smoothly. Intelligence, attachment, or loyalty do not define this difference. Capacity does. Recognizing this removes blame from the situation and replaces judgment with understanding. Behavior stops appearing emotional or intentional and begins to look regulatory. Rest becomes a sign of safety rather than indifference. Waiting reflects pattern tracking rather than longing. Watching indicates orientation rather than worry. Each response serves the same purpose, restoring stability after a familiar shift. Once this framework becomes clear, reactions that once felt confusing begin to make sense. If this way of seeing your dog is helpful, you may want to subscribe for more calm, science-based insight. Do dogs miss us or the feeling we create? Dogs do not register absence through personal identity or mental imagery. The mind does not preserve a picture of who has left, nor does it replay shared interactions. What changes instead is the stream of sensory information the body uses to maintain regulation. Familiar scent, steady sound, and an established rhythm within the space act as anchors. Those cues signal whether the environment remains understandable and safe. When such anchors fade, internal systems adjust. This adjustment is not driven by sadness or longing. It is a recalibration process. Regulation shifts in response to altered input. Some dogs regain balance quickly as the body settles with minimal effort. Others require more time because regulation capacity varies. Absence is acknowledged, but not in the emotional framework humans often assume. The response centers on environmental stability rather than personal loss. Dogs tend to react more strongly to routine disruption than to physical distance itself. What disappears is not a person as an idea, but the regulated state that consistent presence helps maintain. When that state returns, internal balance follows. The transition happens quietly, without reflection or storytelling. Understanding this reframes the concept of missing someone into something more accurate. Dogs respond to how safe the world feels when familiar regulation cues are removed and later restored. The experience is physical rather than emotional, rooted in balance rather than memory, and governed by stability rather than absence as humans define it. Why reunions look so intense? Reunions often register as dramatic moments. Movement becomes faster, energy surges through the space. vocal sounds intensify and attention sharpens instantly. From the outside, this response looks like pure celebration. Underneath that surface reaction, a different process is taking place. During separation, the nervous system remains in a state of readiness, not distress, not fear, simply active monitoring. Familiar cues that normally signal stability are temporarily absent, so internal tension stays slightly elevated. When a person returns, multiple regulating signals arrive at the same time. Scent fills the environment again. Sound patterns regain familiarity. Movement through the space becomes predictable. That sudden restoration allows the nervous system to release what it has been holding. The visible burst is not excitement building upward, but pressure releasing downward. This is why calm reunions play such an important role. A steady entrance communicates that vigilance is no longer necessary. Once the release completes, many dogs slow rapidly. Energy drops, muscles loosen, rest follows naturally. That shift does not reflect boredom or emotional withdrawal. It signals that regulation has reached completion. Internal systems return to baseline. Highly animated greetings can extend the release cycle, pushing excess energy outward instead of allowing balance to settle. Calm returns support a smoother transition back into regulation, allowing the body to reset cleanly and remain settled afterward, rather than carrying tension forward. How long is too long really about? No single number defines when time alone becomes harmful for every dog. Duration on its own does not determine impact. What carries more influence is regulation capacity. Each nervous system responds differently when familiar patterns change. Some animals maintain balance for long stretches without difficulty. Energy stays steady. Rest comes naturally. Other dogs reach a limit much sooner, even when the surroundings appear calm. Sensitivity, age, past experiences, and daily rhythm all shape this threshold. One dog may remain regulated for many hours, while another begins to struggle after a shorter period. Because of this variation, counting hours offers limited insight. A more useful focus shifts toward internal experience. How did the body respond while separation unfolded? When regulation holds, time moves quietly without strain. When balance starts to falter, stress builds gradually beneath the surface, often before visible behavior shifts appear. This understanding replaces rigid rules with thoughtful observation. Awareness allows care to adapt to the individual rather than relying on generalized guidelines. Regulation capacity becomes the lens through which absence is evaluated. By paying attention to how the body processes change, support can be adjusted in ways that maintain balance. Time alone becomes less about duration and more about how stability is preserved throughout the experience. What actually helps dogs when we're gone? Support during absence does not come from constant activity or nonstop distraction. What matters far more is predictability. Repeated sequences before departure, familiar sounds lingering in the home, and a daily rhythm that unfolds the same way each time provide the nervous system with orientation. When departures happen calmly, without rushed movement or heightened emotion, adjustment begins smoothly. Nothing spikes abruptly. Nothing feels unclear. The body recognizes the transition as familiar rather than threatening. That recognition allows regulation to continue instead of breaking. Returns are just as influential. When reunions remain steady and unhurried, stored tension releases gradually. Balance completes its cycle rather than overflowing all at once. Consistency builds expectation, and expectation creates a sense of safety. Toys and treats may hold attention temporarily, but stimulation alone does not stabilize internal systems. Mental engagement can distract without organizing the body. Regulation relies on rhythm, not novelty. What truly helps dogs is environmental steadiness. Familiar cues appearing in the same order, patterns repeating without surprise, a space that behaves reliably day after day. When structure remains intact, internal balance follows naturally. Calm settles in, energy evens out. Absence becomes something the body can move through without strain. Once stability returns, separation no longer disrupts regulation, allowing dogs to rest, observe, or disengage with ease rather than remaining on alert. What dogs measure instead of time? Dogs do not experience absence through the passage of minutes or hours. Duration is not counted internally, and clocks hold no relevance. What the nervous system tracks instead is organization within the environment. Familiar sound patterns, expected movement through space, and recognizable cues form a framework that allows the body to orient itself. When that framework remains intact, internal balance settles without effort. Awareness softens, energy drops, rest becomes accessible. When predictability shifts, engagement increases. This response does not come from sadness, worry, or emotional reflection. It emerges because structure has changed and regulation has not yet re-established itself. Absence is stored as a physical condition rather than a remembered span of time. Internal systems retain information about whether the space felt readable and consistent. That sensation becomes the reference point used during future separations. Long or short does not matter in isolation. Stability does. A calm environment allows regulation to continue quietly. An altered environment keeps the body attentive. Dogs do not recall how many hours passed before a return occurred. What remains is the imprint of how steady the world felt during that period. Familiarity signals safety. Disruption signals uncertainty. Regulation follows accordingly. Understanding this replaces assumptions about time with a clearer focus on environmental consistency. Safety becomes the true measurement, shaping how absence is processed and how balance is restored when familiar patterns return. The bottom line: understanding replaces worry. Dogs do not keep emotional records. Duration is not tracked. Absence is not replayed. Resentment does not form. Internal systems adjust to environmental demands. When predictability remains intact, regulation follows. When structure dissolves, alertness persists. Understanding this reframes familiar behaviors. From door waiting to intense reunions, guilt gives way to clarity. Love is not measured by time apart, but by how steady life feels when familiar cues return. Calm arrivals and consistent routines allow regulation to complete its cycle. If learning how dogs experience the world beneath visible behavior matters, subscribing may help. Understanding fosters better care than worry ever could.